My name is Jerry Gill. Today is January 7th, 2009. I'm visiting with Rick Wilson, a former Pistol Pete mascot, in the library in the Oklahoma State University campus in Stillwater, Oklahoma. This interview is for the O-State Storage Project of the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. Rick, appreciate you taking time to visit with us today, okay?
Well, thank you, Jerry.
Well, Pistol Pete's a pretty famous guy around here in Oklahoma State. But let me back up and ask you a little bit. First of all, could you share some of a little bit about where you grew up and a little bit about your family and maybe some things that kind of shaped your life a little bit before you got to Oklahoma State?
Sure.
Okay.
I was born in Chickasha, Oklahoma. I grew up or spent some time as a young child down Panama Canal Zone. Moved to Duncan, Oklahoma, and then from there, after my mother's death, my father and I moved to Oklahoma City. Went to junior high and high school in Oklahoma City. I'm a fourth generation Aggie. My great-grandfather was here in the early 1903 area sometime.
Really? What was his name, Rick?
His name was Borden, was his last name. And then my grandfather, Frank Borden, was here, and my dad, Don Wilson, and my uncle, Joe Borden. So I'm the fourth generation. I really didn't have a whole lot of choice.
That was a great story. So your great-granddad was here in right at the turn of the century,
right.
Early 1900s. And so your granddad was here in the maybe 30s?
He was in the 30s, right. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, I was here. He was just here a couple of weeks ago. I brought him over here for a basketball game, and he hadn't been here since I graduated 22 years ago. Wow. So we went around and looked at the few buildings that are still standing that were here, like Old Central. That was about it.
Did you recognize any of them?
Yeah, Old Central and Moral Hall. That was, other than that, everything else was gone. But he was just, he's 90. He'll be 94 this month. Wow. And the end of this month. And so he's seen a lot of changes.
And your dad then was here on campus?
My dad was here, what was that? Must have been in the late 50s. Yeah.
Did they have different majors? Are they kind of the same field? Or do you remember?
On the Borden side, they were all engineers, mm-hmm. which the Wilson side, my father and I were sales oriented. So I've kind of got that internal fight that goes on with me. I'm not smart enough to be an engineer, and it's thank goodness I have some golden tongue at times that I can make a living.
Now you lived with your dad. Did you have any brothers or sisters?
No, I was an only child growing up until later in life. When I was in college, my father remarried again, and I have a little brother that's 25 years younger than I am. So I'm an only child, but I do have some brothers.
Now, where did you go to high school, Rick?
Putnam City North. It was actually brand new when I was actually the second graduating class at North, and we kind of set tradition, which was really a lot of fun. We set the fight songs and all the traditions that came to follow there were started in the first couple of classes.
Great. Well, you've answered usually one of my early questions on Rick. How did you get to Oklahoma State? You said you didn't have any choice. That was the fourth generation. I understand.
My dad told me, matter of fact, it came out in an interview when I was Pete one time, and he didn't quite like it, but I just told him the truth. And that was, he told me that, I could go to school anywhere I wanted as long as it was in Stillwater. That would be fine with him. And so I said, well, I just relayed that conversation. He didn't like it very well, but it's the truth.
Oh, mercy. Well, what do you remember? What was your first time you recall, Rick, having seen the Pistol Pete mascot?
Well, I've been here, I think 2 weeks after I was born. I was in Gallagher Hall for an event, or so I was told. So I was here all the time. My dad had season basketball and football tickets, and we're a big wrestling family. So spent a lot of time here. But my earliest memory was I was about 5 or 6 years old, and it was at a wrestling duel in Gallagher. I don't recall who the Pistol Pete was at the time, but I'm sure I could go back and put a name with it. I've got a number of Pete autographs through the years. But that's really what kind of put forth that first interview or that first impression on me. I actually got to put the head on. He held the head up. I got to stand there, and he lowered the head down on my shoulders, and I've talked about that quite a bit on what an experience that was.
Was that in the era before it was still okay maybe to take your head off or something? Were y'all back in a private area?
We were it was at a duel, and Pete was walking behind the wrestling chairs there where all the wrestlers were seated, and he was signing autographs and gave us some bullets and those kind of things. And he had gone over to take a break, and so we went over, and I just, being who I am, I had to ask a question, could I put the head on? He said it was a little too heavy for me, but he'd hold it while I stood there.
Great. What was your first impression, Pete? You know, as a younger kid, I mean, when you like started seeing your first song, you probably don't remember it so early, but your first early impression, what did you think of this guy, you know?
You know, part of our family, the Wilson side of my family, were all ranchers, cowboys. So I thought that was pretty cool. He was a cowboy. I didn't realize that he was actually a character of a person, Frank Eaton, until I got into college. It was at that time that I realized that there was somebody behind that. But I just remember always thinking he was cool. I mean, he was just like most kids. You want to shake his hand. You want him, you want to see the gun. You want to see him shoot the shotgun, shoot the pistol, and pay attention to you.
That's great.
Kind of larger than life.
What can you tell us a little bit about some of your tryout experiences? What year did you try it? Your freshman year, or was it later, or sophomore year?
No, it was actually my fourth year, my senior year. I actually was a fifth year senior. My fourth year, I tried out for Pete. Now, I was around Pete a year prior to that. Rob Reynolds at the time was Pete in 83, 84. And I had the opportunity to meet Rob. And he and I got together and we started an organization called Pete's Partners. I don't know if you remember back then in the 80s, remember the old band, big bass drum that we used to pull out on the field? Been around forever. Gave me an idea about, hey, let's put together a Pete's Partners program. And so we kind of assisted Pete, and we'd pull him around after we scored touchdowns. And it'd be interesting to know where that drum is now, but that's kind of what my first introduction to Pete was. And then in 84, after watching Rob, I thought, I was a three-sport letterman in high school, and I wanted back on the field, but wasn't talented enough to play. So I said, how can I get on the field? And that looked like a pretty easy way to go out there and have fun.
So you're interested in Pete was kind of sparked by being what you call Pete's partner and working with the bass drum and being around it. Yeah. You kind of said, hey, thought that was neat. I want to do that yourself. Yeah,
and traveling with 24 beautiful women wasn't a deterrent at all either. So no, it was kind of a culmination of all of those.
That's great. What can you remember about at that time the tryout kind of experience? First of all, you had to sign up for tryouts. Is that right? Mm-hmm. And what was it like? Can you describe that a little bit?
It's similar to what it is now. I mean, that's probably one of the things that I really enjoy about our organization, our fraternity, is that we've held true to those traditions, or at least since I've been around it, in that you're getting interviewed by guys that wore the head. They know what it's like to go out there. A lot of situational questions. What would you do if this happened? What would you do if this happened? Being able to express some emotion, which is pretty difficult because you're talking about a 35-pound fiberglass, plaster head that has one emotion to it. And
you can't speak, obviously.
Can't speak, can't raise your eyebrows, can't smile. So you've got to get creative on how you're going to be able to create emotion. And that was, as I tried out, and in the first year the tryout was, I was nervous just like anybody else would. It was something that I really, really wanted. I don't think that there's ever been, other than getting my wife to say yes, I can't think of another decision that I wanted so bad. I mean, truly, truly wanted it so bad. And if I had not been chosen, I would have hated to be the judge the next year, because, I mean, it was just one of those. As a matter of fact, my second year when I tried out, it was even more of it was a lot tougher.
And your first year, you were not selected your first year?
First year I was selected. Dave Treese and I were Pete my first year. Mm-hmm. And back then we had Pete and an alternate. And Dave Treese was chosen as Pete. I was the alternate. Dave was actually he was in professional school in architecture at the time, and I was going to be a senior. So it worked out well for both of us. And then the second year I tried out again. And as I said, the Kirk Carter and the other guys that were on that panel were they were ruthless. I mean, it was.
So who was your alternate to you in the year you were Pete?
Scott Petty.
Scott was okay.
And after my year, then we had Pete. We had two Petes from then on, basically, just because of the appearances were so numerous.
So did you So you served as Pete 2 years. Did you receive any compensation at all, Rob, in that time? I mean, I'll talk about uniforms and stuff, but just any compensation at all from the athletic department?
Well, we got some books taken care of at the time. Prior to that, Pete had been a part of the band. Mm-hmm. And so when I was Pete, my first year, when Dave and I became Pete, that was the first year that the athletic department took over the Spirit Squad. Before that, they were all a part of the band organization, which they got nothing. Matter of fact, Rob Reynolds, I remember Rob saying, he had to provide everything other than Shap and the gun and the head. He provided everything else. So it was a blessing for Dave and I and all the Petes that had followed, because with Dave Martin, who's the godfather of Spirit Squads, you're given so much. I mean, they're provided everything, and so we got some books taken care of, but shirts from Teeners, jeans, boots, belts, all of that stuff was provided, whereas before it wasn't. Matter of fact, my very first appearance was at elementary school right up on Boomer, where my first appearance, I didn't know what to wear. I had chaps, a pistol, and a Pete head. So I went and put a shirt on and put a vest on and kind of took off.
So then Rick, you were right in that transition. Your first year, you were still with the band, actually?
No, my first year was actually athletics. It was the year before.
Didn't have the outfit yet, did
we didn't have any sponsors. We didn't have anything when I first tried out.
Wow. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about everyone knows about the Pete head, obviously. Well, I don't want to come back to that a little bit later, but the rest of you got, what else did you get then?
Well, they had, Teeners stepped up and became the sponsor, and I imagine they may still be the sponsor. I don't know. But they gave us Western shirts, belts. We provided our own belt buckles, boots. We could get some boots at discount. They provided jeans for us. You got, I don't remember, 2 or 3 pairs of jeans and several shirts to wear, the vest. Then the OSU Tech over in Okmulgee, the saddle shop over there, they went ahead and built and made us new chaps that were now the orange color, whereas the chaps that I originally have that I was allowed to keep are actually in Heritage Hall right now. I gave those so that they could be put on display. And they're brown.
Natural red, leather kind of color.
That's right. And they didn't have they weren't all jazzed up like they are now on the fringe. So they made that. They made new gun holsters for us and took it to the next level.
What about some, do's and don'ts and regulations? Pete, can you remember the things they said after you're accepted? Here are things you in public you can do or not do?
Well, that was use good judgment. If you remember back then, Myron Roderick was the athletic director at the time, and you know Myron quite well. So there's a million stories that can go with with Myron, but basically it was just use your good judgment. As a mascot, you have to walk to be the best. You have to walk that line, and that line is you don't fall over, but you kind of try to push the envelope as much as you can. But you have to have good judgment, and you have to be respectful, and that goes in line with any of your interaction with referees and other players and other mascots and all of that type of stuff. I made one time short story. I had Paul Hansen, if you remember, that was Paul's last year in 80. It was the fall of 85 as a basketball coach. And, there was high emotion on Paul staying and high emotion on Paul leaving. And I unfortunately crossed the line because a fan had a sign that wanted Paul Hansen to stay. We love you, Paul. Please stay. Well, I grabbed the sign and I just held it up to the stands and fans, and they all went crazy. And immediately, Myron Roderick informed Dave Martin to go get that sign out of my hand. And so Dave shares with me, don't hold that sign up anymore, just because it put the athletic department in a difficult situation. So I learned early that hey, you gotta really. What seems like a great idea sometimes isn't the greatest idea. And Myron and I always had a great relationship. He later hired me to work in the athletic department. So it was just one of those learning processes.
Rick, how many, in terms of appearances, now there's athletic appearances that you made, and there's personal appearances. How many appearances totally would you make in a year's time?
Well, back then it was probably not as much as they do now. I actually still have my mortar board at the time that had all my appearances in it, and there was close to 400 appearances.
Wow, per yourself?
In a year, right. And then Scott. Birthday parties, weddings, just visiting people in hospitals, going to school, a lot of schools, then parades. So there's a lot of events that go on, and it just becomes one of those things where you have to manage your time.
Rick, what was during school year and athletic meetings going on, personal appearances, everything, what was a typical week like for you?
Well, depending upon the season.
So,
Basketball, wrestling season, you had more going on during the week, whereas in football, you just have the football game. But it's going to school. We were at the time, because we were taken over by the athletic department, we were then put on weight programs. We had to go lift. We had to go lift weights just like the athletes were going to lift weights.
And the reason for that was?
To be in shape and to get body fat down and to be representative of the school we were at.
Wow.
And it was that whole mindset of just taking it to the next level. Instead of just having people out there kind of freelancing it on their own, you've got standards that you have to meet. So go to class, go to weightlifting. As Pete, I didn't have to go to cheerleading practices. I would every now and then, just because they were, it's kind of fun to. I was never a gymnast by any stretch of the imagination, but there were things that they did that I wanted to learn how, and so we were always just an inclusive group.
Did you ever create some combined activities with Pete and the cheerleaders?
Yeah, we had, I don't know how many, there's been Pete's that have been involved in different routines with cheerleaders in the last several years. I actually was in a routine. Curtis Davis was the coach at that time, and he wanted me in a routine, which is somewhat cumbersome because of the weight, and you can't really move without breaking your neck. So there were some things. I had cheerleaders that would put me up in liberties and lift me up, up over their head at Gallagher, which is really put in a dangerous situation. Fell one night at Gallagher and was just fortunate that I fell straight down rather than kind of tipping over. But tried not to get in the middle of too many of those, just every now and then.
You didn't want to be the top of the pyramid they built.
Well, that was when I fell. So it was one of those deals where you kind of stop and go, ugh, this may not be such a great idea.
Was it, really kind of think back on it, I mean, was it what you thought it'd be, being Pistol Pete, in terms of, was it the schedule, the things you did, did it match up to your expectations or what you thought it might be?
It didn't even come close to what I thought it would be in the sense that it was so much more. The workload didn't bother me at all. That was, matter of fact, I could have done it, every day of the week. It's what took place from the time I said that, and I said, yes, I want to do this, and I tried out, to today. It's been interesting because there's not a facet of my life since I left 22 years ago that Pete has not affected. And I mean major influences in my life, from jobs to meeting my wife to every one of those. If I hadn't have been Pete, wouldn't have happened. Now, something else would have happened, but it wouldn't have happened the way that my life has been put forth. And I think that's the thing that I would have never imagined. Never imagined.
Well, did you have difficulty balancing your, quote, two lives, end quote, when you were doing it?
No. Maybe some do. I didn't. I mean, it's... I always like being in the middle of it. I always like being in the middle of having the attention. Whether it was sports, I wanted the ball. Whether it was being Pete, I want to be in the middle of what's going on. So it was fun to walk across campus. People say hi to you. You have no clue who they are. And hi, how are you? And, a lot of people that you meet that you never would have met before. I didn't realize that, I think at the time, that so many people Pete's different. I mean, you go to different universities and you ask about their mascot, and it's a mascot. Pete, to most people, he's not a mascot. To a lot of, he's Pete. Well, he's a mascot, right? Well, but he's Pete. He's different. And that's the part I didn't understand. But going to class, trying to balance those, it was just it was something that was enjoyable.
Well, Rick, you looked at something that I did want to ask you about Pistol Pete persona, and did you ask it the right way? How was Pistol Pete, in your mind, different from mascots at other schools? You alluded to that. I mean, a tiger, some kind of mythical jayhawk bird. I mean, what was special in your mind about Pistol Pete as a mascot that was different from other schools?
Well, first of all, it starts with Frank. It starts with Frank Eaton. I mean, not only are you, if you're chosen as Pete, you're not just representing OSU. That's big enough as it is. I mean, that's kind of overwhelming to the point thinking that, oh my gosh, I got all these eyes. Someone somewhere is always watching you. So don't do what you're not supposed to do, or always put yourself in the university in the right light. But beyond that, you have a family, the Eaton family, that you're also trying to make sure that you're doing the right thing and that you're putting forth Frank Eaton in the right light. And those were things that, I just never really realized until once you kind of get out there and you go, wow. And that's why I think that Pete is so much different. He's not a tiger. He's not a horse. He's not a jayhawk. And you're walking around with the 357 on your hip. And I was growing up, I was raised on a farm, so therefore I got pretty good at bull whips and doing rope tricks and stuff like that. And I incorporated those into being Pete. You just don't see a lot of, Trojans running around with bull whips and, they got a horse and a sword and they pretty much just stand over there in the corner until somebody's ready for them. Pete's different. I mean, he's a living embodiment of a guy who is a real character. And we'll use character in all sorts of terms. I mean, he was a character.
Were there some characteristics, speaking then, Rick, of Frank Eaton, Frank Pistol Pete, that you tried to emulate? What were some of those?
I tried to incorporate the old Pete, the raggedy old Pete, the bow-legged Pete. That was one of the things that I was never in drama. I was in music and did a lot of vocal stuff, but never in drama, so I never had any acting backgrounds. But one of the things that I always did, and it sounds corny, and I've said it before and other guys, and if you ask Scott Petty and some of those other Petes that were around me at that time, they'll back it up and say when Rick would put the head on, his whole body would transform. It would go from being an upright, position of person to, as soon as that head went on, I'm naturally bow-legged, so it was a little bit easier, but my legs were bowed, my back bent over, and my arms were out, and it just took on that old, if you look at a picture of Pete, he's an old cowboy. I mean, he's broken down, but don't mess with him. I mean, and that was the persona that I tried to portray. I remember when I was at a camp, I had a judge that he gave me his little card that he wrote on when they gave their comments, and he put down, "I love that walk. I love that walk."
Did you have the swagger? Some of them have too, that Pete swagger.
I had the swagger. I was the bow legs helped me just because that was natural, but I did. I mean, it was the bow leg. It was everything was over exaggerated, and just what you would see. I mean, if you look at a photograph of Frank Eaton, you kind of feel like, I wouldn't want to meet that guy in a dark alley. I don't care how skinny he was. He just looked mean.
Did you dip too?
No, I tried not to dip because you really didn't have anywhere to spit in the head.
Real Frank Eaton, he always had a big.
That's right.
Well, let's have that back in some earlier conversations, Rick, about the other mascots. Now, you were in competition. Mm-hmm. I remember one year, and I think were you an All-American mascot recognition?
I was. I was humbled by getting chosen as the first Pistol Pete All-American. That was in '85.
What was it like? Can you describe the competition a little bit?
Well, they all go through it now. I mean, pretty much at that time, they had been doing that years before.
Mm-hmm.
We just didn't have anybody that had received that award yet. I don't know if they felt sorry for me or what, but I was able to accept that award. It was a process where you go to a camp for a week, and it's a culmination of that camp. Things that you're doing, things that you're learning. There's a lot of pantomime type stuff that was put together, and then you perform for the judges, you perform for the group, you perform for the other cheerleading staff that are there, and then they pick 5 per year.
Now, where was your camp, Rick?
It was in Dallas at SMU. The mascot instructor there, I can't remember his name now, but he was actually a gymnast instructor, and he had coached Nadia Comaneci at one time. So that was his background, but he took kind of a liking to mascots, and he kind of veered that way and was able to help a lot of folks like myself that just wanted to go out and have a good time and kind of go relive their childhood, make other people laugh. So that was he was there, and he was one of our coaches and helped significantly.
Was that pretty special to you? I mean, I know also to your university, but to you, Rick, I mean, it had to be pretty gratifying.
You know, it was. It was the year before we were at camp, and I saw the guys that got awarded All-American. And there were a few of them that were just phenomenal. Now, their costumes and their outfits allowed them to do things that Pete can't do. And that was really one of the most rewarding aspects of it, is because Pete is so hindered. And people are, well, what do you mean hindered? Well, I can't jump around. I can't do backflips, and I can't, and all that kind of stuff. I have to do other things that stand out, and I have to do them just like a basketball player would. He's got to be technically sound, or a wrestler. He's got to be technically sound in order to be the best. And so that's what I really worked on, was just I want to be the best. I want to be better than anybody else has ever been up to this point. Now, there's guys after me that are far greater and done things that just blew my mind. And I thought they just phenomenal Pistol Petes. But at the time, it was pretty rewarding. And I think the thing after that was that I was also the first Pistol Pete that was ever selected as a mascot instructor for the National Cheerleading Association. They awarded a couple of those a year to guys that they felt could join the staff. And I joined. There was a gentleman by the name of Jeff Ayers. He was a midget, and Jeff was the cardinal for, where was it? Louisville? Was it Louisville? I don't know. He was a little cardinal. Hilarious. I mean, it was absolutely, you just crack up watching him. He could just do things that would blow your mind. And he and I were both selected as mascot instructors and had a great relationship. He went on to be in the Barney the Dinosaur series. So Jeff did well. Jeff did well.
Well, speaking of your kind of the ties and guys around you, you had a little bit to do with Scott Petty, who followed you, and Lance Mills. Could you share a little bit of that relationship?
Scott Petty was, Scott and Lance and I were fraternity brothers, Delta Tau Delta. Scott and Lance were a year behind me, and Scott was one of my best friends. I was the best man at his wedding, and when I became Pete, my first year, he kind of watched and saw what was going on in that second year and said, you really need to do this. And so he tried out, and there's probably not anybody better than Scott Petty. I mean, the guy's he's got a huge heart and loves the university. Lance kind of did the same thing. He watched Scott, and he's like, well, heck, I can do that. And so he became a part of it. The thing about Lance is that he is such a student. I mean, he really is a student of whatever he gets involved in. I mean, he wants to know everything. And so Lance has become a student of Frank Eaton and has been very, very instrumental in some remarkable things happening with Pistol Pete and Frank Eaton. When we inducted Frank into the Cowboy Hall of Fame, I mean, Lance was in the middle of that. I mean, he was leading that charge. That's something that I always admired about Lance, because he took it beyond just being a guy in a head and kind of emulating what other guys did, but he wanted to know all the background. And if you ask Lance Millis a story about Frank Eaton, he can tell you he's got the campfires. He's got that whole book. That's right. He's got it memorized. He's got the Veteran of the Old West memorized. So if you got a question, ask Lance.
Yeah, that's correct. Well, going back a little bit earlier conversation, Rick, about the mascot, what do you think the Pistol Pete, in what ways does Pistol Pete mascot symbolize the spirit of Oklahoma and Oklahoma State University in the Old West?
Well, there's so many things I think that he symbolizes. Independence. I think that's the first thing, is independence, justice, doing the right thing. Now you might say that going and hunting down the murderers of your father may not be the right thing to do nowadays, but back then that was the basically the law was in your own hands a lot of times. But love of his country. I mean, the guy loved his country. He really did. I've read Veteran of the Old West several times. Matter of fact, over the holidays, I read it again. And I just love going back and reading those old stories. He was faithful, loyal, true. He had vices, just like everybody else, but he didn't let those vices hinder him.
Man of action.
He was a man of action.
Good guys, bad guys, black and white in his life.
That's black and white. That's right. There wasn't any gray area. And I never met Frank. He died in 1958, and I was born in 1962, so I never had the honor of meeting him. But I've met a lot of people that have, and I've read his autobiography, and I knew his youngest daughter, Elizabeth Wise, very, very well, and that was one of the things she said. Daddy was just a man of his word, and if he said it, that's what was going to happen. And so I think Oklahoma State. I think that in our state itself, he symbolizes everything that we hold true as our heritage.
Sort of if you will, the romance and the persona of the Old West and the cowboy arts type, motif kind of thing.
That's right. And the thing that it's not, and he was flamboyant. He could take a dull story and turn it into something that you couldn't get away from. I was just a couple of weeks ago. I actually went to Perkins, and I was, they've set up that new plaza there with his house and the statue of Frank Eaton, and I took my boys over to it, and I said, I want you guys to see Frank's old house, and we were standing there taking some pictures by the statue, and a gentleman and his wife pulled up, got out of the car, and started talking to him, and they were from Kentucky or somewhere. And he was from Perkins originally. They were there for the holidays, and so they were about to go home. They wanted to go by and see the statue of Frank. And we get to talking, and he said, "Are you from Perkins?" I said, "No." I said, "But I do have kind of a loyalty to Frank Eaton. I'm kind of tied a little bit, even though I never met him." And I told him I was Pistol Pete, and he said, "Really?" He said, I was as a kid, I grew up here in Perkins," and he said, "Frank Eaton was the best babysitter in the county." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Because anytime somebody was looking for their kids, we were on his front porch." And he said he could take a story and turn it into just the best adventure ever. And so I thought, that's hearing that from a guy that actually sat on his front porch and listened to the stories. Now, were they kind of embellished a little bit? Probably, but that's what, but that the true tone was still there.
What, kind of going back to some of your experiences on the field, and ask you a couple of questions. What was your first memory of being on the field, on the football field? Was that where you were first Pistol Pete at football and athletic event? And how did you feel first time in front of the crowd?
The first game was the fall of '84, and it was an away game at Arizona State. And Pat Jones, that was Pat's first game. And Dave and I were there, and we traded off, and just the excitement of all of it being there was kind of overpowering. It was exciting. It was exciting to watch Dave. It was exciting to see the fans away from home at a visiting game, to see how they would react to him. But I don't really remember my first home game per se. But I've got a 1,001 memories. Other than when you put the head on, you start walking down the street, you're walking into the stadium, that when you're at home and all the people yelling and hollering, patting you on the back, and just that excitement, Okay, it's just like, it just reminded me of being in high school, getting ready for a game. And that excitement of, okay, I got a job to do. I don't have to go out there and get in a car wreck, so I can't wake up tomorrow morning from being sore. But I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do something to make people laugh.
Were there some special memories that you recall that stand out in your mind?
There's so many of them. Probably the ones that folks like to hear about the most is the Ice Bowl. I was Pete during the infamous Ice Bowl. That was a crazy day. It was crazy weather. The thing I remember the most about that is that the week before that we'd been in Ames, Iowa, and I was freezing to death. I've never been so cold in my life as when we were in Ames, Iowa. There's nothing between Canada and Ames except barbed wire fences. It is cold. And I was freezing, and I remember a guy on the Iowa State cheerleading staff said, you need to put bread sacks on your socks, over your socks, and then put another pair of socks on, your feet will be fine, even with cowboy boots. So the next week, it was supposed to get cold, and I thought, well, I'll try that. That's the only thing that saved me through that game. I didn't put a coat on until the end of the fourth quarter, and everybody else was freezing. I had 7-8 inch icicles hanging off the brim of the hat. I'll never forget digging a hole in the ice just to try to make a field goal. It was just crazy. Another memorable was the night the lights went out in Gallagher. In the middle of basketball games, the lights went out. It's pitch black, And the thing that I think that I was most, that I was good at, probably the best, was close interaction with people. I didn't really like football games near as much as I like basketball and wrestling, because I like being right there with them. A lot of Petes don't like that because you're in everybody's way. I just took it as an opportunity to have fun. If there's a dull moment, I'm going to be doing something. The night the lights went out, first thing I did is I yelled, give me a lighter. And I got a lighter and I went out on the court and I started taking guys back to the bench. It was, nothing was on except the exit lights, and all you could see was this lighter going around on the floor. It's those types of things. Probably the one that I remember the most, I think that touched me the most, was at a basketball game. A little boy was up, this was back when Gallagher only had 2 levels, and a little boy was hanging over the rail screaming, Pete, 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 all first half, just screaming Pete, and I'd wave to him, but that wasn't satisfying his quench for Pete. And I motioned to him to come down on the floor at halftime. And halftime came, and that back then we didn't have all the activities that we have now at halftime. And I'll never forget, I was at the south end of Gallagher, and this little boy comes down the stairs on the north end. And he ran diagonally straight across the court as fast as his little legs would go. He's probably 5, 6 years old. And, as Pete, you're overpowering because you're so tall, the hat's so tall. So we always would, you always get down on their level. And so I got down on my knees so that when he got to me, we'd be pretty much looking eye to eye. He never slowed down. He ran flat over me. And I, of course, over-exaggerated the impact. And I fell back, threw my arms back up, on the court. My legs are doubled back over me. And this little boy laid on my chest and hugged me.
They get a good direction in the crowd, I guess, too, didn't it?
And I just laid there and I thought, you're doing a good job. There's that, I don't know, that emotion just was incredible. It was incredible just from that interaction and how much this thing, this character, meant to him. There was nobody else in the arena to him. Place was packed. He had no clue. It was just him and Pete. And I think that was probably, of all the memories I have, that was the one that just, it blew me away. And I don't remember, I remember when I had my first child, my first son, they put him in my arms. It was that kind of emotion it was just like, wow. I mean, you're everything to this little bitty guy. And that was kind of my first interaction as
Well, kids love Pete, don't they? And I was talking to a couple of Pete's that they had to be careful because, you know, the kids would come right up on them. They can't see
That's
right
right.
down in front of them. So and you got some interesting stories, I'm sure, about working with kids and their parents.
First thing you always do is, because we actually had cut a hole in the bottom of Pete's chin and put a screen there so that you could see down underneath you, because you literally couldn't see. I mean, you can see out the holes here, but you couldn't see anything down here. So the first thing you do is I would always kind of sweep my hands, and you can do that with over-exaggerated movements, and just to make sure I don't run over anybody. You always got to be careful with the gun because kids come up, you can't see them, and they're wanting to get the gun out. Had a kid shoot my gun off in my shaps in the holster one day. He cocked it, and I didn't know he was there. Bang! He shoots it, and it shoots right down my shaps, and there was a burn mark on the side of the shaft. So that was one of those things where you use your other Pete to make sure that you don't have those kind of things happen. But I mean, that's just part of that thing that you learn, that it's dangerous. I mean, you're talking about a blank that could actually hurt somebody.
I understand you have some safety training with the gun, do you not?
Mm-hmm.
You kind of describe some of the things you're supposed to not do with your gun and some of those regulations.
Yeah, I mean, Captain Ty, I don't know who it is now, but Captain Ty was the chief of police at the time when I was there. And first thing that when I became Pete, we went through gun safety and how to operate a Ruger, 357, and the gun was not plugged. I mean, it's a live 357 gun at the time. I don't know how they are now, and I had blanks, and they're just waddings in there, but that thing's going to shoot a flame out so far. And so he would, we went through all of that, and he'd test the guns, and they cleaned the guns, and he, Captain Ty, we had to have a talk one time because I was going through ammunition like it was candy. He was like, "Rick, you got to slow down on the pistol," because I liked shooting that gun.
The cartridges.
The cartridges.
Give those to kids.
I'd give them to the kids. Every one of them. I'd give them to the kids. And they all want one. And so we went through one semester. I remember he just said, he goes, "Man, we got to slow down on shooting the gun." And I was like, "Okay, all right, Captain Ty, we'll do that." I don't know that I did, but I told him I would.
Were there any special from your personal appearances? Any special memories you have of weddings or, visiting kids at elementary schools, or some special times you could share with us?
Yeah, you're always going to the reading classes, and I've still got all the packets of letters from little kids, thank you for coming to my class. I had one that I always remember, and that was going to see a little boy in the hospital that was dying of cancer. And that was it was meaningful. I mean, to think that, he could have had a clown, he could have had Ronald McDonald, he could have had whoever he wanted, and he wanted Pete to come see him. I went and did the appearance and spent my time there with him for a little bit and went on.
One of those times you're glad you got the hit so they don't see the tears.
That's exactly right. I was bawling. When I walked out of the room, I was bawling. Doesn't take a lot to get me bawling, but I was bawling.
Well, and I'm sure some of you get some interesting, kid stories about when you go to the schools and so on.
Yeah, I had. I remember we were at a school. I don't even remember now where it was. Kid was yelling, "Pete, Pete, Pete!" So I turned and went to go back down the hall where he was at, and forgot that there was a doorway, and I broke my neck. And I took off through the door, and you have to remember that Pete head's about a good 8 inches, 10 inches higher than the top of the door frame on an 8-foot door, and I plowed it. And it almost took me to my back. Fortunately, I had a couple of cheerleaders that had gone with us on the deal. They caught me, and I'm thinking, speaking of that, Al McGuire, you remember Al McGuire? Mm-hmm. He was at that camp in '85 when I became All-American, and Al McGuire had a weird interest in mascots. He loved mascots. Matter of fact, he did a number of specials, interviews on mascots. And he came to our camp that summer and did a special on mascots. And I remember that he took a liking, because Pete is so much different than, the Red Raider and all the other, the Duncan Demon or whoever he was, the Duke Demon or whatever. And so he saw, I was standing, he said, "Hey, I want to put that hat on." And I said, "Well," and I normally wouldn't let anybody, an adult, put the hat on. Now I'd hold it up and let a kid under it, but it's just one of those things. I just felt that was kind of sacred territory as an adult. And he said, "I want to put the hat on." And I was like, "All right." So, they got cameras, they had all this on film, and Alan was a tall guy. So I'm holding this thing up, and I said, "Okay." I said, "We'll get it down on his shoulders." And the first thing I told him, I said, "Don't lean back. You have to lean forward as Pete. You have to, because the helmet that's in there, if you lean back, you'll go back." First thing he did on that big, tall, skinny 6'7" frame of his, he leaned back, and the guy's literally caught him. He fell back because it's 35 pounds, top heavy, and it just took him over back. Took him over backwards, and so we got the head off of him, and after it was all over, I turned to Petty, and I'm like, we were that close to breaking Al McGuire's neck. Can you imagine how bad that would have looked? He said, Scott was laughing. He said, it's, you told him not to lean back. I said, he's a basketball player. What do you expect? You're not listening? So,
Well, speaking of that, a guy breaking his neck, so did you feel a special sense of responsibility representing Oklahoma State University as Pistol Pete? What did that mean to you?
It meant the world. It really did. First of all, being a fourth generation Oklahoma State student at the time, it meant that there weren't very many guys that had this opportunity, and it was something that I cherished. I held it dear to my heart. I still do. Even now to this day, I get introduced to someone and they'll go, Rick was Pistol Pete. That was a long time ago. But you're still Pistol Pete. So at that time, it was everything in the world, still is, always will be. I had the opportunity when we did the statue over in Gallagher. Sandra Van Zant did the statue of Pete that was over there. I got myself and Scott and a couple others got to actually be a part of that to kind of direct that process as far as, she'd have us over to look at it. Is it all looking good? She wanted to hear from Pete's. And then she heard from the university, everything looks the way it's supposed to. That meant a lot to me because it's such a special, special thing. We were over there one time with Scott, and I actually had my oldest son, who's 10 now, and he was with us, and so we were over there making sure that the statue, it's just a big statue. Yeah, it looks great, I'm not an artist by any stretch of the imagination. And Scott and I were talking, and Sandra, she had asked me, she said, is your son Parker, is he going to be Pistol Pete? I said, heck, I don't know. His mom wants him to go to Harvard, and I'm trying to get him brainwashed to go to Oklahoma State. And so she said, I think he's going to be Pete. And I said, well, why is that? And she goes, because it's destiny. And I said, well, I don't know about destiny. And she said, well, it is. She said, because his fingerprints are in the back side of that gun that's in that statue. And I said, what are you talking about? Well, it was still in the clay mold, and she had gone over there and actually had taken his hand. He wanted to touch the gun. And so when he reached up to grab the handle, she put her fingers on his and kind of pushed his fingers in just a little bit so his fingerprints were in the gun. And I said, I don't know that that's destiny. I just think that means he came over at the right day. So I hope that I know that it means as much to me as it does to any of the other guys that ever put the head on. And I think for future Pete's, whether it be him or anybody else, it'll be just as sincere.
It's a pretty small fraternity of guys that have been former Pete's. You guys stay pretty close, don't you?
Yeah, we do. I see Kirk Carter all the time, and Rob Reynolds is one of my closest friends, and Scott Petty, of course, and Lance, and even some of the older guys. Matter of fact, one of them's my insurance agent, and it's because he was Pete. Figure if I can't trust Pete, I can't trust anybody.
There you go. What do you think, Rick, is the collective history and heritage of the Pete's through the years?
In what way?
What legacy do they convey collectively as a group to Oklahoma State? What's important? You said, well, people recognize me as a former Pistol Pete. What does that legacy mean? What do you think it means to Oklahoma State people?
I think that you're such an icon. The character is such an icon, and that the character has such value to the alumni. We went through that exercise a number of years ago with a couple of universities over Pete. And I know as a Pistol Pete and having conversations with other alumni that never knew that went on they were just floored to the fact that some other university could think that they could take ownership of Pistol Pete with everything that he's here. And I tell them, I said, well, why is that? And they go, because when you think of OSU, what do you think of? I mean, you think of that big head, and you think of the great scholarships and the academics and the sports programs. But I mean, as far as the legacy, I think it's just that people hold him to such a standard because he's Pete. He's not a mascot. He's Pete. He's different.
You alluded that earlier. You said you put that head on. You're not Rick Wilson. You're Pete, and so what do you mean by you're Pete? You're taking on
every student that ever's walked through this door. You're taking on that pride, that spirit, that determination, whether it's a student that's barely getting through a class that I'm going to pass, by golly, I'm getting my degree. Whether it's that nose guard that's out there getting his head hammered every day at practice that will never see the field on a game day. Or it's that OSU wrestler that's in the practice room that's turning out national champions, but he never saw the mat wearing an orange singlet. He always had to wear black. I mean, that's who he is. I mean, that's who you're representing. In addition to the Eaton family, in addition to the things that we talked about as far as the true spirit and the right, the wrong. There's right, there's good, there's evil. There's right, there's wrong, there's black, there's white. Being independent, making sure that you're not going to back down from anybody. I'm not backing down from anybody. I had to perform with the San Diego Chicken one time. And I didn't care for the San Diego Chicken much because he just wasn't a very pleasant guy to be around. He's funny, but he was not a very enjoyable person to perform with because he wanted to completely stage the show. He wanted to up you. Pete, Pete's not going to be up by anybody. I don't care if you are the San Diego Chicken. I'll go with, we'll play your skits, but I'm not going to back down from you. And I think that's any Pete that puts that head on, he ought to have that attitude. We're not backing down from anybody. Doesn't matter who you are, how great a team you are, how many Rhodes Scholars you got.
There's the Cowboys, and then Pete is the Cowboy.
He is the Cowboy. There's Cowboys, and that's a great way of putting it.
He's the Cowboy.
He's the Cowboy. He's special.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. Going back to mascots, can you remember did you ever do any enactments with other mascots at other schools? Not checking on other Big 12 schools or other universities or playing against any?
Willie, the Wildcat at Kansas State, I can remember doing a number of skits with them. I never would allow them to win though. Whatever it was, I won, and that's easy to do that when you got a double barrel shotgun and a .357 on your hip. I tried to stay out of Chip's way up at Colorado, the Buffalo. I tried to always stay out of his way. Ralphie, I would let him. They had a Chips Invitational one day, a ski invitational that Dave and I went to, and actually they invited, I think it was 25 mascots from around the United States, and I got to be one of those. And we actually skied at Winter Park with Pete on.
Wow.
So I'm skiing down the mountain with his head on. So I tried to stay out of Ralphie's way. The Missouri Tiger, He was about like the Wildcat with Kansas State, but it was always I always got the last say because I'd always shoot him at the end. There wasn't much they could come back with.
That's right. Okay. What do you think? You're talking about the collective legacy of Pete's. What do you think about Rick? Your legacy as Pistol Pete. What do you think people think about when they think of Pistol Pete, Rick Wilson? You hope they'll remember.
The thing that I hope, and it's just those that were around you, and the alumni that watched you at that time. I've met a number of people that I never knew, and they said, "When were you Pete?" And I said, 84, 85, 86. And they were like, "I remember you. You were the one with the bow legs. You were the one with the rope. You were the guy with the bullwhip, weren't you?" The thing that I hope that they always remember, and that I've heard from, is the fact that, man, you never stopped. And that was something that, as I said earlier, and it went back to that day when I was 5, 6 years old and I got to put the head on. I literally said, every time I put that head on, and however many 400 appearances, 300 appearances, whatever it is, every time I put that head on, whether it was to take a picture with the Spirit Squad or whether it was an event or a special event, I put the head on. I said, I'm doing this for that 5-year-old. It's living that dream, getting to be a little kid again. But I always wanted them. I want to be the best. I never want to stop moving because there's somebody watching all the time. Doesn't matter where you're at, somewhere, somehow, somebody's looking at you. Out of all those eyes, somebody's looking at you. And I want them to walk away and go, man, that guy, he wore me out. He never stopped. I think I'm the only Pete. I've been on the board since I left, choosing all the Petes, and I can't remember of a Pete since that that's done rope tricks, that has incorporated rope and rope tricks and bull whips into it. I had an experience in Washington, University of Washington game when we were up in Seattle with the bull whip. I got high-low by 2 Washington cheerleaders and literally knocked me senseless. I mean, blacked me out. They came at me at about 20 yards, full steam. One hit me high, one hit me low, and I never saw them. Just KO'd me. So I wanted to fight. It was what I wanted to do, but I couldn't fight. I had to stay in character, and so I got that whip out, and I started cracking that whip about 3 or 4 feet in front of their faces, and they started moving backwards, and they realized that I wasn't very happy, but I wasn't gonna get into it. And they were all dressed up in mohawks and their thing. So those props come into play. Sometimes they're kind of handy to keep people away from you if you want to.
Double barrel shotgun, absolutely.
Double barrel shotgun will get your attention. But those are the things that I think that my legacy held up, is just that I did a lot of things. I did a lot of props. I did the blind man and the cane and the pretty girl posters at free throws, and I was always playing with the refs, trying to stay on their good side. Sometimes I kind of rubbed them a little raw, but those are the things that when you talk to the Scott Pettys and Rob Reynolds and the guys that were after us and Lance Millis, I mean, those are the things that they say it was how what can I think of next? How creative can I be? Because you have to remember, it's just a face. It's a stern look on that face. It doesn't change. Eyebrows don't go up. It doesn't smile. So you got to do other things to make him soft. I could make Pete soft. I could make him cry, or I could make him meaner than a dog. But it was all through trying to be creative.
Rick, we were talking about kind of what it meant to be Pete, but I want to go back again to some of your experiences with the other mascots at the other schools and universities. Can you share some of your some maybe not so memorable moments?
Yeah. You try to forget about them, but it's hard to sometimes. You have to have good judgment. It comes back to that, and understand that when you're at a visitor's home, they're not always so hospitable. The only times that I really had a lot of problems were Colorado. You got to stay out of Ralphie's way. The other thing is that the security there would even they even told me, they said, stay away from the student section. Don't get near the student section. Because they have literally taken mascots from other schools, hoisted them over their hands, and have taken them all the way to the top of the stadium. Not that they want to throw them off the other side, but I mean, you know what college students are like. They get in the moment, and next thing you know, something happens that you don't want to happen. So I would stay away from those. The University of Washington incident was probably the worst physically that I had received, just because it literally knocked me. It blacked me out, and it was painful. I mean, you get two guys, 170 pounds, run at you both ways and not see it. It's painful. But OU was not. It was never fun. It was never enjoyable. Probably the worst memory I have as far as not remaining calm was probably in Norman in fall of 1984. We went down there with the anticipated possibility of us winning, and they were scared we were going to win. And after that game, they rushed the field. Their students and everybody rushed the field. Pete was down there. I wasn't. Dave Treese was dressed up as Pete at the time, but we had the drum there, and had a number of fans. They were spitting on us, throwing beer on us, cussing us. Had one gentleman in particular that was had a few too many toddies, and was trying to just punch a hole through that big bass drum. And unfortunately, fortunately he didn't. The unfortunate part was my reaction to him. And, I just tried to get him to just leave us alone. Just leave us alone. And since he wasn't going to be able to punch a hole through the drum, he thought he'd punch a hole through me. And so we had a little bit of a scuffle on the football field after the game. And that was probably my low point of ever being Pete, but it was to be expected. We were in Norman. I mean, there's a lot of low things in Norman that I don't really want to try to go back and remember, but that was probably the lowest. But as far as any other school, never really had a problem with it. Just use your good common sense. Stay away from the students. Missouri, they were always fun. I mean, they take me and they kidnapped me one time. Took me and split my legs and rammed me against the goalpost a few times, and I played it up like it really hurt, and they were good about it. They said, we're not going to hurt you. We're not going to hurt you. And I said, okay, you're not going to hurt me. And then when they got done, then I shot them all with a gun, and we all lived happily ever after. So I won.
Yeah. Well, Rick, going back earlier to the talk about the helmet and how, a lot of people don't realize how massive that thing is, how much it weighs. Mm-hmm. But you had some personal experience with the designer at Walt Disney Studios. Right. Can you share some of that story?
Yeah, it was in the fall of '85, and Dave Martin, Associate Athletic Director, had received a message from a gentleman in California. His name was Mr. Johnson, and I think Bob Johnson was his name, and something to the effect that he has a cowboy head in his garage, and he wants to know if we want it. And so Dave had relayed the information to me, called this old gentleman and figure out what it is that this guy has. And he really pretty much just wrote it off, not thinking that, it's just some guy. He's got a cowboy head and he thinks we need it. So I called him, visited with him on the phone. Couldn't quite understand at first what he was talking about. He was a gentleman that was pretty sure in his conversational tone and pretty much commanded the conversation, and kept telling me he had an old cowboy head in his garage and wanted to know if we wanted it. And I tried to get him to expand upon that. He shared with me that he was the one that back in the early 60s had created a cowboy head for our university. And then the light bulb came on. I realized he was talking about he had created the original Pete head that we use today. There was the papier mache head that's in Heritage Hall, which was created in 58, 59. But he had created the Pete head. Well, at that point, it sparked my interest to what he was actually talking about. And he said, well, I've got the head that I use to make the mold of the one that you've got right now. Do you want it? And he said, because if you don't want it, I'm putting it out on the curb and letting the garbage man have it. He had retired from Disney Studios. He was one of the original character artists, I guess, for Walt Disney. And he had created this head. And I said, well, yes, we do want it. Now, at this point, I'm thinking, how much is this going to cost? And I'm just Pete. I'm not in a position to be negotiating for charges of buying a head, because we had just had another head made 2 years prior to that with a company, I think it was in Minnesota, and it cost us $10,000 for that head, and it was absolutely hideous. As a matter of fact, Rob Reynolds used it. He was the only Pete ever to use it because I wouldn't wear it because it was just an ugly head. And so I told him, I said, yeah, we do want it. And I said, what are we talking? I mean, what are you talking about cost-wise? He said, no cost. I'm just going to ship it to you. If you'll pay the postage and handling, shipping charges, it's yours. And I said, well, absolutely, sure. And I had asked him, I said, now, this is the Pistol Pete head for Oklahoma State University? He said, yes. I said, it looks just like the one we have now. He said, well, except for it's got shamrocks on the hat brim, and it's got a sheriff's badge on the front of the hat. And I thought, okay. He said, the reason it has that, he said, because when I was at Disney, we had gotten a phone call from some organization in Dublin, Ireland, that wanted a leprechaun for a parade. And we didn't have any leprechauns. And the closest thing I had that looked like a leprechaun was this cowboy head. So I shipped them. I put the shamrocks on there and I shipped them this head. They used it in the parade. It's been used one time and they shipped it back to me. I thought, oh, great. Yeah, we'll take it. So we get off the phone. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, we're not going to get a head. We're not going to get anything in the mail. A week later, this huge crate shows up at the athletic department. And Dave Martin calls and says, your shipment has arrived. And I go over there, we open it up, and sure enough, there's that Pete head inside.
Now, Rick, this is from your description. So they made two of them then at the time, whatever year that was, in the early 60s. And they, being Disney, kept one and sold one to us. But so this is a almost exact replica then of the one we're using.
This is the mold that they used to create the one that we had that I was using at that time. The only thing different about this head is that, well, there's two things. It didn't have all the plaster around the fiberglass mold portion of it, so it wasn't as heavy. It was real light. The second thing is that the hat would come off, and the head was bald. It had hair around here, and the hat's 3.5 feet wide on the brim and however tall, 4 feet tall. You could take the hat off, and then you just have this ugly head with the bald head of Pete, and that's how it arrived.
So now, Rick, just kind of, so there's a mold, and then there's actually the cowboy head and hat both?
No, that cowboy hat and head was the mold.
Okay.
And then they went ahead, when they got the call from Dublin, he went ahead and painted the face up so it looked like something. So when we received it and I pulled it out of that big crate, it looked just like the head I was using, except it was about half the weight. Instead of being close to 35 pounds or so, it only weighed around 12. And I actually used the head without the hat a few times. Remember when I went to when the University of Colorado had that CHIPS ski invitational where they invited all the mascots. I tried to ski down the mountain with the hat on, and it was just so cumbersome. I was afraid it would break my neck. So I took the hat off and I skied with the bald head instead, and put a big stocking cap over him. When I came back, I then used him at a basketball one basketball game, and I used him at one wrestling match. When I walked out, what I'd done is the first half of the game, I was Pete, just like everybody sees. At halftime, I took the hat off, and I put a Santa cap on, and I walked out. It was during Christmas. I walked out on the basketball court, and it was like I suddenly walked into church. I mean, the whole arena just, ooh. And nobody knew what to say. And they're looking, and then they're trying to figure out what. I've been looking at this guy since 1958, and he's never had his hat off. And so there wasn't a real good response to that. So after those two, and then I did that at a wrestling match, came out with a singlet on. And I took the hat off, and everybody kind of freaked out. So I said, it's probably good if we just leave the hat on. And so now that head, they've replastered around it to give it strength, because without that, then it would deteriorate. And they've now permanently mounted the hat onto the head. The star is actually in Heritage Hall also.
So still using the exact mold with the change you described, still using
That's right.
today.
So both Petes have the exact same head, whereas when I was Pete, we had the head that I used, which was the old head that was built by Bob Johnson in '62, and then that new head that we've gotten, which I'm sure they threw it in the trash somewhere because it was falling apart.
Great story.
So I mean, that's information that a lot of people don't know about.
And Bob Johnson, you described, just died a couple years ago, didn't he?
He did. I actually was watching the news one night, and he was he was the last artist that worked directly under Walt Disney, and he passed away. It was last year in 2007, or it might have been 2006. I think it was 2007. And he was old then, so he must have been in his 90s when he passed away. Boy, the stories he could tell.
Oh man. Well, we've alluded to some of this, Rick, but again, maybe how has your experience as Pistol Pete influenced your life?
It's everything. I mean, it is. I can't imagine where I would be today, and the experiences that I've had outside of college, if it wasn't for Pete. I mean, he is. I owe him a debt of gratitude I can't repay. I can't. I mean, there's not enough words. There's not enough money. There's not enough gratitude to express my sincere thanks for him being where he was at a particular time, to want to hang around Oklahoma State, that he would get to have the honor of being asked to be the caricature for this university, and also those 5 or 6 guys that were on that board that chose me. As I stated earlier, there's not an event in my life, a major event in my life, and I consider major events being job, meeting my wife, which leads to my children, all of those things. After I graduated, I went to work for the athletic department, worked for Myron and Kurt, and Rob and Kurt and I worked together, and matter of fact, got to be responsible for the first renovation of Gallagher Hall in 87, 88, 89, and learned that process right out of school. I mean, building those relationships with alumni that I would have never had that opportunity. That was all Pete. Getting that job was because of Pete. I mean, Myron, God love him, for something he said, I like the guy, we ought to hire him. From there to, after leaving Oklahoma State, and I was there for 4 or 5 years, left there, went into the medical industry. Got that interview because of a relationship with a donor that I had. I didn't get the job, but I got the interview. And then I got to go in and prove what I could do. From that position, leaving the state of Oklahoma for a number of years, coming back to Oklahoma, interviewing with Public Service Company of Oklahoma, the medical company was Biomed. It was an orthopedic implant company. Then coming back to Oklahoma, getting an interview with public service, was there for over 10 years because of Rob Reynolds, who had mentioned my name to a gentleman who said he was looking for the right person. And talked to me over the phone. I fly in the interview. I get the job. It was Pete. I mean, it was all of those are Pete generated. Meeting my wife. I met my wife because I moved. I'm not a big fan of Lawton, Oklahoma, but that's where my wife was, and that's where I got transferred with a public service. That was the best thing that ever came out of Lawton, Oklahoma, is Rebecca. And so I met my wife because of that short stint in Lawton, Oklahoma. My children, because of meeting her, which led from a Pistol Pete introducing me to a guy that hires me. My occupation now as a National Vice President of Sales for On Whole Works is from a relationship I built in college, the owner of the company. And the reason is because he wanted to meet me. We were in school together. He wanted to meet me because he thought being Pistol Pete was cool and he wanted to try out. So, I mean, all of those things that kind of transpire, it's all because of Pete.
Rick, speaking of that, kind of the connection, people knowing you're Pete, how is the reaction? How do people react to you today when they find out that you were former Pistol Pete?
It's admirable. I mean, it's, as I've stated earlier, it's one of those things of, if I'm being introduced to someone that I don't know by a good friend or someone that knew I was Pete, they'll always introduce me and say, Rick was Pistol Pete.
What's the reaction?
And they're like, really? You were Pete? And they want to hear the stories. Oh, when were you there? Oh, you were there when Thurman and Gundy and all those guys, and Leslie, yeah. They want to hear the stories. Mm-hmm. The trips and the travels and all that stuff that goes on. And, it's interesting. And it really kind of blows me away. And it's humbling because as a Pete, even though it's very, very close to my heart, I mean, it's, well, I have a wedding ring and I have my Pete ring on. And there's a reason. There's a reason they're there. My wedding ring is closest to my heart. Pete's right behind her. So, I mean, he's pretty important to me. But it still blows me away from the fact that I was Pete. I mean, it's not a big deal. I mean, I was Pete. Well, it is a big deal. And I think because there's just not very many. And I don't think I'd get the response if I was the Jayhawk.
Well, how was homecoming for you this year? We had the 50th anniversary of the first year, 58, that Pete was on the field. Can you describe that in the field? And you got a letter jacket also, I think. Can you share some that homecoming experience?
I tell you what, that was incredible. Yeah. That was the best reunion. And we get together periodically, but it was the best reunion ever. When I was Pete, we did a reunion, and I got a proclamation from the governor, Governor Nye at the time. And we got about, 20 guys back. And we thought that was a good turnout. We had 40 some odd guys back this time. I mean, it was incredible. It was incredible. And just the not just the turnout of all the guys that were Pete, but just the appreciation from the athletic department. And a lot of that all goes back to Dave Martin. I mean, I can't thank Dave enough for what he's done for the Spirit Squad and for Pete. I mean, Pete, he's taken Pete, and, they always say, with a little bit of money, you can do a lot of things. It's not that you're gonna get there, but it's sure gonna give you a little bit of footing to possibly get there. Dave has been that. I mean, he really has been the traction behind Pete, getting the national recognition that he gets. All of the 50th anniversary stuff this year that's all due to Dave Martin. And he,
You guys got a letter jacket. What else did you get?
We got a letter jacket. We were grand marshals of the parade this year. There was, they had dinners for us and just pictures and
did the interviews.
The interviews, right? Mm-hmm. Did the interviews, and and you've been very, very hospitable and and enjoyed the process and being able to at least talk about some of these things that we forgot about. As I was telling you, and I brought that box with all that you asked about the memorabilia, and I knew I had a box somewhere and I opened it up and I was like, and as I opened it up, I started going back through, oh, I remember that. Oh, I remember that, So it was just an incredible experience. It's one of those things that it's a once in a lifetime. I'd like to be here when it's the 100-year anniversary, but but I don't know if that's possible. So I sure enjoyed this one. It was a good time. It was fun also for those of us that have small children that aren't even close to getting to college, to just get an opportunity to see through our eyes how cool it was. My kids are like, yeah, my dad was Pete. He walks in my office and my whole office is full of Pistol Pete. I got Frank and I got pictures of me as Pete and the 3-foot statues and all that stuff. Yeah, my dad's Pete. Big deal. That weekend they got to relive it through us, and that was cool because we had that big meeting up in the O Club room, and that was really a neat event. The letter jackets were just, that was incredible. I mean, we just, we're O Club members because we were on the Spirit Squad, but you never got a letter jacket in the past. I mean, and that was something that said, it was just a great sign of appreciation. And we all truly, truly enjoyed it.
I heard that was the only group that had received a letter jacket other than actual letterman as a group.
That's exactly right. And our letter jacket is a little bit different. The O, it has a Pete in the corner. So it's a little bit different than the letter jacket that you received for playing football, which keeps it separated from, the true athletes. But we all go through, we have to train, or I'm not out there, Pete's aren't out there at football practice and basketball practice, but they're in the weight room with them, with all the athletes, and the girls have to go through the diets and do the body fat tests and all that kind of stuff that they go through. So it's nice to have that shared community.
What, speaking of the discipline, you go through all the hours they spend, the 200, 300, 400 appearances. What would you tell a young man, Rick, that's thinking about being Pistol Pete? What would you say to him?
I tell them, first of all, they need to just stop and really contemplate whether this is something that they truly want to do. And when I mean stop and really contemplate about that thought process, because this isn't something that you do now. This is something that you are going to be doing forever. This is a major decision, because you're going to be a part of this fraternity and you're going to be held accountable to maybe a level that you hadn't really thought you wanted to. And there have been a few guys that kind of came through that process that, oh gosh, I didn't know it was going to be all this. But it's something that's going to follow you for the rest of your life. And if you can answer, do I want to represent the university, number one? Mm-hmm. Do I want to represent the Eaton family? Do I want to be able to have the time of my life? More fun than you could ever imagine. And basically, if you're a little bit immature and want to go back to being a little bitty boy, being a little kid again, and doing things that if you take the head off, people kind of wonder, well, maybe you might want to check him in, that little hospital down at Norman. You can't do that without this head, but you put that head on and you can have the time of your life. And you can do things that people will laugh, and you'll do things that people will cry, and you'll do things that people will remember.
Did you tell them about the discipline as well? It's going to take to be there.
Well, absolutely. And that's where you have to really think. I mean, there's going to be expectations that are going to be laid, and you're going to be held accountable. It's not a freelance job. There's regulations that you've got to follow through the athletic department. There's expectations that are going to be, you're going to be held to, whether it be weighting or doing weights and building the muscle process, or whether it's those expectations that are held to you by those former Petes. And I can tell you that being a former Pete, there have been a couple of times that I've stood in the stands, and I've gotten to the point I look at Pete every now and then, but there have been a couple of times that I've had to take note of a few things. And then when we went back through the interview process, if that individual was trying out again, we had come to Jesus talk, a heart to heart. These are things that you will not continue to do if you want to wear that head.
And having said all that, Rick, would you encourage him to try out?
Oh yeah, I can think of one individual that unfortunately we had to have that talk with. And I told him, I said, you need to, it's up to you, it's your decision, but I can't imagine you not taking that step and do it again. I mean, I can't imagine anyone not wanting that job, because I know what's on the other side. It's kind of like going to heaven, I know what's on the other side. Don't be worried about it. I know what's on the other side. That's kind of how the Pete situation is. We see these kids come in here, and what's fun about it when we're interviewing them, Jerry, is that you see these kids and they got hunger in their eyes. I mean, they want it. You just see it. And some of those others, they're just sitting there, they're just there kind of going through emotion. But those guys that you see it, you see the passion, you say, oh, I want that. I really, really want that. Those are the guys that are going to be good. Those are the guys that you're going to be proud of. And those are the guys that, as an alumni, you're going to want to follow. You asked a question earlier, what do you think alumni think, about? I think what they want to see somebody that they respect as representing their university. But alumni, just like you and I, we enjoy seeing people that were younger than us, that have come along and they've succeeded beyond where they were at. You look at the guys that great athletes, but they've gone on to own their own businesses. And you go, wow, I knew he was going to make it. He's just that kind of guy. And those are the things that you look at some of those kids and you go, boy, you need to try out. And if you didn't make it this year, you really need to try out again next year.
Rick, and I probably know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you had it all over to do it again, two-part question. One, would you do it again? Yes or no? Oh,
I have that, absolutely. I mean, they're just not even a hesitation. Yes.
Second part of the question, anything you do differently?
I don't think there is, Jerry. And the reason I say that is because my life leading up to that, I'd had events that took place in my life that I realized there were fleeting moments that things changed in the blink of an eye. And that person wasn't there any longer. Or, boy, I really would have liked to have held on to that memory a little bit longer and enjoyed the process. I have a saying that life's not a destination, it's a journey. Enjoy the journey. Enjoy the journey. And so when I became Pete, and I mentioned earlier that I still have my mortarboards from 84 and 85 and 85 and 86 that I kept because I want at some point, just like the other day when I opened up that box 22 years later, I got to enjoy the journey again. But when I became Pete, I made a commitment to myself, 2 commitments. One was every time I put that head on, I'm going to remember that 5-year-old little boy when I was 5 and I got to put it on. And I'm going to remember what that meant to me. And the second thing was that I'm going to savor the moment. And I can't tell you how many times I can remember standing in a basketball arena, on a football stadium, at a wedding, wherever, a parade, and just taking it in. I can remember. I can remember my last event as Pistol Pete was the 89er parade in Guthrie, Oklahoma. And I remember taking it in, just savoring that moment, going, this is the last time. It's just like you did on senior day. Last time you're going to be on that field. So I took in every time I was Pete, I tried to just take a moment and savor the moment. I mean, I can remember wrestling matches and basketball games and just all sorts. I can remember pictures at Theta Pond, and I can remember just stopping and going, just taking it in. Just take just a brief moment, take it in. I'm going to remember this. It's not going to last long. It's going to be gone. It's kind of like raising kids. So enjoy the journey. Life's a journey, and so always, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. But I don't think I'd change anything. It was too good the first time.
That's great. Rick, anything else we haven't covered you'd like to share that, you want people 20, 30 years from now think back on to be able to hear you say?
It's interesting when you look at old footages, whether it's old home movies or you listen to old tapes. I was actually on the website earlier today, clicked on the Pistol Pete page, and I realize now they've got, and it's probably through you guys, the archives of Pistol Pete talking, and it's actually actual voice recordings of Frank Eaton talking, and I was and I'd never heard that before. They're in the special collections, and so I'm listening to that, and I thought you can read it in a book, you can watch videos, and you can listen to recordings, but that's real stuff. I mean, it's people living the moment. I mean, that's people that are, and especially with that recording of Frank Eaton, I mean, he's telling the story. He's telling you what it was like. So I really don't have any enlightenment words of wisdom, just the fact that it was fun. It was a great time. 20 years from now, 40 years from now, 80 years, 100 years from now, there's going to be somebody that puts that head on. It's going to be another Rick Wilson somewhere. From some little bitty town somewhere, nowhere, Oklahoma, that's going to put that head on. It's going to put those boots on. He's going to remember when he saw Pistol Pete. And suddenly it's real. It's real life. And it doesn't matter whether it's now or 20 years or 40 years or 100 years ago or in the future. For that person, it's real. And it'll never be the same.
He's going to be Rick Wilson's also going to have his bull whip and his rope.
Yeah, I need to work on some of those guys. We need to work on getting the whip and the bull whip back, or the rope and the bull whip back in the picture again.
Any interesting stories that you want to hear about? I guess amusing stories. I mean, they're just off the wall.
I think as I was going back through some of my memorabilia, I have a tape that's got some video clips of a couple of television stations did some specials. There's one of them that I had even forgotten about. Bob Berry Jr. was doing a special when we were down at the Gator Bowl. And I had told him a story about, I was dating a girl here in college at the time named Linda Lockett. She was from Bartlesville, Oklahoma, sweetest girl in the world. And I remember we were over in Tulsa. I went to see her, and I had gone to an event earlier that day it was in Muskogee. It was a U.S. Veterans Armed Services Parade or something. And I was coming back, and I stopped through Tulsa, and I had Pete Head in the car with me, in my truck. Well, we were going to go to a movie, and I didn't even know where to put this thing. So I remember going up with her, and I had this in this video with Bob Berry. I remember going up to buy our tickets, and I asked the fella behind the window, I said, "Oh, by the way, you had any burglaries or any, people breaking in cars?" And he goes, "Well, yeah, every now and then, it happens. Big parking lot over here at Woodland Hills." And I'm like, "Well, I got a question for you." I said, "This is going to be the craziest question anybody's asked you today." I said, "But I am Pistol Pete at Oklahoma State." And he's like, "Oh, you are?" And I said, "And I've got Pete in my truck with me. You mind if I take him in the movie house with me and we sit up?" So he's like, "Sure." And I was like, "No, I don't want to buy another ticket for him. I just want to, he needs to tag along." So Linda and myself and Pete went to the movie. And you talk about getting some strange looks. She's sitting on one side, I'm in the middle, and I've got him sitting in the seat. And people would walk in, and they're looking, and I'm like, "Don't ask, just enjoy the movie." But, there's just story after story like that. But that one kind of jogged my memory the other day, because as I was going back through there, that I was showing those videos to my kids, and I saw it.
You got a couple more like that?
Correct.
That's great.
Oh, I can't think of any. That was one that was just so odd. It was just so odd. I've told you about the ice bowl in Gallagher, and I don't know. There's just, we have to get onto a topic, and then it'll jog my memory.
Okay. All right. Well, think about it. Let me give you a holler.
That's right.
Appreciate it, Rick. Thanks.
Thank you, Jared.